I hope you guys are hearing me. Let me say good evening to once again to one and all as we welcome you to this evening's Indaba program.
Indeed, a very pleasant good evening to you, Ruskin, and to our live listening audience by way of 91.1 FM, Talk City. Always a pleasure to be in your company. Ambassador Reverend Kwame Kamau, I am, and I'm one of three hosts of this program, Indaba, the voice of the people, the voice of the Emancipation Support Committee, the place to find consensus, certainly the place where knowledge grows. If you are joining us by way of Facebook, by way of CPAN Facebook page, or if you're joining us by way of the Emancipation Support Committee YouTube, we want to say Bayete, Akwaba, Bevakasha, welcome to one and all. Please do me a favor, smash love and or like on the media that you are tuning into right now. Leave us a comment, your name and where you're shining in from, where you're listening in from. We'd love to know where you are. And then thirdly, please do share this like with your friends and family that we may be able to spread the Pan-African love far and wide. Of course, we are in for quite a doozy on tonight. Dr. Claudius Fergus, the man of the people, the people's historian, is going to be taking a sabbatical on tonight. But I am expecting my brother, fellow activist extraordinaire, Shabaka Kambon, to join us pretty soon. In the meantime, we have the effervescent, usually working backstage, really, really hard backstage, Queen Sister Renee Francois of the Emancipation Support Committee, bringing information as it relates to one, hopefully some highlights in terms of your amazing launch, which would have been last Saturday, and then also in terms of what's happening, what's coming up, what's in store for the ESC family, for the ESC fan base, for our Pan African community. There's a big event, of course, taking place this weekend. I like to see strong in myself. So again, very pleasant good night and welcome to front stage. You do such an amazing job backstage, but welcome front stage to you. And again, very pleasant good night.
Yes. Hi, good night, everyone. Good night, Reverend Kwame and Shabaka. Thank you for having me. So, yes, like you said, we just launched our 2024 Pan African Festival, TT, commemorating emancipation. It was an amazing launch. We have to, thank and acknowledge Port of Spain City Corporation, Mayor Chinua Allen, who would have partnered with us to ensure that we had just a really spectacular experience. I would like to say we had a strong turnout from the diplomatic corps, which I think is really endearing, and it shows that support and also their understanding that they also have an African diaspora in the countries that they are representing here in Trinidad and Tobago, and understanding that they need to celebrate that particular community and the contributions they would make to their respective countries. We had really good performances as usual. I continue to be floored by the talent that our cultural groups have. Shagorna's Women and Youth Group would have been our dancing and drumming group. We also had some amazing young panists with us.
Wow.
And a veteran in the Rapso fraternity at a clan. So I think when you look at the caliber,
I've heard Atta in ages. I didn't know Atta was still around. I
yes,
missed
yeah, he came out and his presence was felt. Um,
Mm.
so we also and I think it speaks to the caliber of performances people can expect going forward with our festival. So up next is the fashion show Iwa Africa, a fashion extravaganza. The theme this year is folklore, Lure.
Okay.
It's a really interesting theme that
Okay.
Richard has crafted,
Mm.
and I think people can look forward to really amazing productions. One of the things that I personally love about the fashion show is that we started to do this designers gallery. So following the runway segment, people have opportunity to go and shop the pieces they actually saw on the runway. Staff is very excited because some of us have already peeped some of the pieces
Oh
and
yeah.
snippets.
Oh,
But
sneak peek.
don't worry. I don't want the public to worry. There are still many amazing pieces for you all to also,
Enjoy. Yes.
view and possibly buy. And again, one of our major sponsors for this was Caribbean Airlines. We have a really amazing giveaway at the door. It's a return ticket from anywhere, um, courtesy Cal. And yeah, people can really look forward to seeing 25 designers with, they
Wow.
will present their collection for this particular season.
25 designers. Wow.
25 designers. We are also working with 6-day models. Um, so it's quite a production, and yeah, it's a really elegant night. I think if I have to describe that particular event, I would describe it as an elegant evening to come out with your family, your friends, and have some nice food. Yeah, because we're going to be serving some. There's going to be African food,
Okay.
Ghanaian food in particular, on
Mm,
sale.
all right. All right.
Right. So
Accra thing. Yes. Yes.
yes,
Beautiful.
well, the Ghanaians call it akara, right?
Okay.
Yes, so there will be that available on sale. So yeah, I really want to encourage people to go to the Queen's Hall box office, right? They can go there physically, or they can visit Queen's Hall website and they'll be able to purchase the tickets. And included as part of the production, we will have performances from Terry Lyons, Wassa Foley,
Big
Hat Plan
names.
again.
Names.
And Charmaine Ford. So people can look
Big
forward to
names.
a really amazing experience on Sunday. So please, if you haven't purchased the ticket, if you don't think you can run away and purchase the ticket on Saturday, tickets can also be bought on the day. It's 300 general, 350 special reserve, and it's worth the money. You're gonna have an amazing experience. Yeah.
I'm certain that it is. I'm certain that it is. A big question to you because
Mhm.
thankfully we have a corporate sponsor this year in Cal. So shout out to Caribbean Airlines Limited. But as we are looking forward to the gift, the prize, a ticket to any destination of the
From any
choice.
destination, I think. It's from
Wow,
any.
that is amazing. Now I know that
Mhm.
you are not eligible. I am not eligible. Shabaka is not eligible. But if you had to choose a destination, it's any
Mhm.
destination. Where would you go?
Um, I think it would be Ghana. I love Kente and Kente print, and
Oh, okay.
I love it. I think it's if you get a Kente outfit, it can be pricey, but it's absolutely worth the investment. And as I'm saying this now, we're fast approaching graduation season, so again, feel free to come and just look at what can be done, and you can have a very unique piece for your graduation, and make that amazing memory as well. So before I go, I would also like to let people know that we also have the launch of the Kwame Memorial Lecture Series.
Excellent.
And coming out of the pandemic, this is the first time we will be doing the launch physically,
In person.
in person. And again, this is after the pandemic, following pandemic.
Sure.
Um, and sorry, excuse me, it's going to take place at the Learning Resource Center at UE. The topic is going to be focusing on Haiti with the activist and academic Jemima Pierre coming to give us an excellent presentation on what is taking place in Haiti now and how the Caribbean can continue to support and continue to be advocates on behalf of Haiti, because we understand that unfortunately right now their voice continues to be diminished, um, globally, regionally, and globally. And we here in the Caribbean and across the African diaspora really have to be Haiti's custodians. And so I am very interested in hearing what she has to say, and what we as individuals as citizens here in the Caribbean and the civil society community as well can do to assist Haiti. And then last but definitely not least is the Yoruba Village Drum Festival. This is carded for the 15th of June. It's going to take place at the Yoruba Village. People might have remembered, I believe it was either 2 or 3 years ago. I can't believe it's so long already. We would have unveiled that amazing Yoruba monument at Yoruba Square. And we're going back this year to pay homage to our ancestors, to celebrate the community, celebrate that drumming tradition, that dancing tradition. And as young people say, fill our vibes. So we want to encourage the public to come out. It's free of charge. It usually starts at 2 p.m., between 2 and 3 p.m. We do a very small procession around the block. Yeah. And everyone enjoys it. So yeah, so we have a very packed June. And because it's emancipation season, it's official.
Ren, let me just put this out here. I was in Caracas a few weeks ago, and I was privileged to have the opportunity to see a group of all female Venezuelan drumming group
Okay.
from Caracas. And upon my return, I spoke to the ambassador here in Trinidad and Port of Spain.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to say that he is more than willing
Mm-hmm.
to help us bring that
Bring it.
Okay.
to Trinidad. So I just want to put that out here on Indaba. I know that our chairperson is listening. It's something for us to definitely consider.
Okay. Yeah, no, I
Something we
welcome
haven't seen. We
drumming
haven't
groups.
all female
Yeah.
drumming group yet.
Yeah. No,
And
we
there's a
haven't. So that's
special
gonna
one
be
in
exciting.
Venezuela.
Yeah, yeah. So most definitely, well, we will speak after the program because that would be like a highlight, one of the highlights of the drum festival if once it comes to fruition. Yeah.
It's very possible, very doable.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for the wonderful work that you do, again, on camera and off camera. I know that this is the season where you all don't get much sleep. You look wonderful for someone who doesn't get much sleep. Keep that up. You need to bottle that and maybe sell that to someone who needs to get the secret sauce in terms of how do you do it. All right. So thank you so much for joining us on tonight.
Before
Do we have the recording for the extravaganza?
Yes. So 1 second.
Of course, as we wait, the extravaganza prep backstage again, multitasking on this afternoon. We want to again welcome our
Emancipation
91.1
Support Committee of Trinidad and Tobago, under the auspices of the Honorable Randall Mitchell, Minister of Tourism, Culture and the Arts, present Iwa Africa 2024, The Folklore, directed by Richard Young, an evening of distinctive fashion, dynamic cultural arts and niche shopping on June 2nd at the Queen's Hall, St. Anne's. Reception from 4 p.m., runway collections at 5 p.m. and retail therapy from 7 p.m. Get your tickets now and a chance to win a return ticket to any Caribbean Airlines destination of your choice. Special reserved tickets $350, general admission $300 at Queen's Hall box office and online. Call 624-1284 or the Emancipation House, 5B Bergerac Road, Marival. Call 235-5008 or 292-7288. We welcome all. Iwa Africa 2024.
Okay, welcome back. Again, very, very exciting times ahead for us in terms of Iwa Africa, a fashion extravaganza, not just a fashion show. Retail. What do they call it? What's that new buzzword that they're using?
Therapy.
Retail therapy. Oh, I love that. That hit me. That hit me. Retail therapy,
No, but
fun,
is
frolic
really good.
food.
Special.
Say that
Uh,
again. Say that again.
it is special among fashion shows in Trinidad and Tobago. It is definitely one of those special events, and I think as that becomes clear, you have more and more people who may not even come to anything else for emancipation, coming specifically to that show. It's really excellent, and I look forward to it every year. One thing I did not hear in that opening segment, Kwame, and I was going to ask you if we could keep Renee for a second. I've been hearing all this good stuff about the presentation by our dear June Sumon at the launch, and it would have been nice for Rennie to say two words about that. But I'm sure we'll have time to do more about that. I heard the launch was fantastic, and that Dr. Suma's presentation was excellent.
Excellent, excellent. Well, you brought the goods in terms of at least a little report on at least the vibe and the aftermath. What town is saying, so to speak. But our fantastic special guests are here with us on tonight, and I want to do justice by way of these introductions. So, ladies and gentlemen of Facebook and YouTube. Again, welcome Aquaba to those that just joined us. You are listening to Indaba, the voice of the people, the voice of the Emancipation Support Committee. And I'm joined live and alive right here with my activist extraordinaire co-host, that of Shabaka Kambon. Frequent flyer miles much, that brother of mine. By now, he wouldn't need that Cal ticket by way of that giveaway at all. He has probably Cal tickets to give away because of his frequent flyer mile experience. But we have two very special guests on tonight as we discuss, by way of our feature discussion, the second decade for people of African descent, decolonization and reparations. The rationale, of course, behind this program is that on the heels of what we would have had the third annual session of the Permanent Forum of People of African Descent, the theme for that event would have been the second international decade for people of African descent, addressing systemic racism, reparatory justice, and sustainable development. Critical to addressing these ongoing challenges and achieving reparatory justice is decolonization of our spaces. We've been talking about that ad infinitum, ad nauseum here. Our education, our legal and financial systems, again, issues that we discuss all the time on Indaba. The objectives of tonight's program are as follows. One, we want to examine decolonization within the context of reparations in the Caribbean. And two, we want to recommend strategic actions which can be taken to strengthen the decolonization process in the Caribbean and the role that can be played vis-a-vis the United Nations Permanent Forum for People of African Descent. Our special guests on tonight are as follows. Dr. The Honorable, Her Excellency Gaynel Curry of the Bahamas. So a very special welcome to our Bahamas audience. I know that there's at least one person from the Bahamas on tonight. I call him the Mayor of Bahamas, Prophet the Honorable Jamiki, is an adjunct faculty member, that is Dr. Gaynel Curry, of the University of the West Indies, Bahamas. Actually, I self-correct, the University of the Bahamas. She has worked on human rights with the United Nations for more than 23 years. Dr. Corey has served as the Gender and Women's Rights Advisor to the OHCHR New York. She has also oversaw work on the International Decade for People of African Descent, looking forward to the historical context as a result of that, which is the first decade, building on assignments in follow-up to the Durban Declaration and Program of Action to end racism and promote the rights of people of African descent. Once you're talking Durban Declaration, you're talking 2001, and you're talking about, many, many moons ago, but we are seeing things coming to fruition now. Our second guest is that of Dr. Tyehimba Salandy, also no stranger to Indaba, and I'm really glad to have him on tonight. He told me before we came on live that he's working really hard, but he looks really good for a guy working really hard. So I recommend hard work for all of our brothers everywhere. Dr. Tyehimba Salandy is a sociologist, educator, and activist. His research focuses on globalization and development, inequality, Caribbean radical thought, coloniality, decoloniality, and subaltern challenges to hegemonic knowledge. And he is particularly interested in the inequalities, as it were, in the production of knowledge. He's a researcher, a research fellow, in the Sir Arthur Lewis Institute of Social and Economic Studies at the University of the West Indies. He's also director at the Institute of Indigenous Knowledge, Empowerment and Research, ICA Institute, which runs ongoing projects aimed at encouraging ecological livelihoods, dialogue, and social justice. So with that very important intro out of the way, a very pleasant good night to you, Dr. Curry. Welcome back. Welcome home to Indaba, no stranger to us, but it's always good to have you with us. And when you are responding, please be sure to unmute. And of course, a very pleasant good night and welcome officially to you as well, Dr. Salandy. Welcome back to the program.
Okay, so guys, let's get right into it. Dr. Curry, well, first of all, just special good night to you. It's good to see you again. Let's start right away looking at the themes. Systemic racism. Let's talk about that, because that's something that we have not really unpacked here in the Caribbean. Starting with you, Dr. Salandy, you look like you're ready to go. Let's start talking about how we, first of all, help our audience to understand what is systemic racism. And then we'll ask Dr. Curry to help us to see how we might move that issue forward.
Certainly. So greetings, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here again. So I think that we have many issues in the Caribbean, particularly those of race and color. And we often hear these terms being talked about in the mainstream, but I don't think that there is really adequate understanding about how racism and colorism deeply affects us all. So it isn't just simply a phenomena that exists out there in society, but every single one of us is deeply affected by it, both in terms of how we may have internalized different aspects of racial hierarchies, as well as how other persons may respond to us and place us in their own personal and social hierarchies. So there is not a whole lot of modern research in the Caribbean that speaks of racism. And I think that that is one of the gaps coming out of the education system, is that studies on race and color has not been given enough focus. And so there is a lack of current empirical research for us to understand how race and color affects us in the contemporary sense. So quite a few of the studies that are there dates back to the 1990s, to the 80s, 70s, 60s. So we need more emergent research for us to start to impact how racism affects us in this contemporary sense. And we have a lot of personal and anecdotal type of information, but there is a need for us to develop this more in a scientific sense.
Dr. Salandy, I want you to help our audience understand the difference between interpersonal racism and structural or systemic racism. So we can segue into that concept. That's really important. A lot of us think of racism as somebody just not liking somebody else because of the color of their skin. But when we talk about systemic and structural racism, there doesn't need to be any interpersonal racism for that to operate.
So often when we think of racism, we think of one person being hostile and negative and nasty towards another person. And that isn't even the depths of personal racism, but certainly a person could mean well, could have good intentions towards members of his own group or an external group, and still perpetuate and reproduce racialized hierarchies. In addition, there is a whole lot of ways that these ideas about race and color and who is acceptable, who is beautiful, are embedded in every single institution in our society. And I would invite persons to go onto google.com and type in beautiful or sexy, and you get a predominance of white and light skin images. And this is important because in a time where artificial intelligence is more and more power in aspects of our lives, this is not a neutral or universal type of technology, but the very emergence of AI is powered a lot by these racial hierarchies that center whiteness as being the default mode of all human beings. And I don't think that we have begun to unpack the racial dimensions of AI and how this reproduces a lot of the racialized hierarchies that have come to us from colonialism and slavery and capitalism. So having that structural understanding of racism is very helpful towards, really understanding people's experiences.
Let me bring in Dr. Curry at this point. Again, welcome, Doctor. When I look at the concept note for this third session, it speaks to the educational institutions, and it speaks to two levels. One, the curriculums of our education institutions, the curricula, and two, the education institutions themselves. It speaks to their need to be accessible and to be, I think the other, and inclusive. Perhaps you could shed some light on that from a Caribbean perspective in terms of what you all have found so far in terms of the structural impediments for African people, even in a region dominated by African people. Have you found structural impediments here in the region in that regard? I'm not sure Dr. Curry is hearing me.
Yes, can you hear me okay?
I got you now.
I'm hearing you, but it's breaking up a lot. Can you hear me?
I can hear you now, yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Doctor.
Okay, I don't know that. I'm not hearing you very well at all, to be honest. So I heard maybe a part of what you were asking me,
Okay.
but I will just say, first of all, thank you for having me. Thank you for having me. But yeah, just to say that it's an excellent opportunity to be here with all of you again. But yes, we did at the third session of the Permanent Forum look at this particular issue of how do we go about a second decade? If we need it, how do we do it? How can we show it's even more effective than the first one? Because we have some challenges from the first decade. But your question was around, if I'm not mistaken, I heard pieces of it, as I said,
Education.
the realities in the region and how we're looking at that. Education, how we're looking at that.
And accessibility.
We did discuss. Can you?
Yes.
Yes, recognizing that the challenge is. Yes. I think you may not be hearing me so well, but just to say that the focus has to be on of course, access to education for people of African descent, but more importantly, the quality of what are we teaching and how are we teaching that and which level are we introducing these matters. And okay. There is a concern that we may not be adequate curriculum even in the Caribbean. One of the challenges I have, if I look at what's happening in Bahamas history, seems to be when you get to grade 9, but we are not teaching our children our history. This comes through very, very clearly in the classroom when you try to discuss these matters. Came back from a mission to Barbados. Are really taking up history as how do we ensure that we have a sustainable focus on these issues in the region? We are about in the Caribbean to start introducing an understanding of reparations at the secondary level, right? And that is still being negotiated and discussed with the Ministry of Education. But understanding that if we don't start introducing it at a much earlier age, we have a chance of losing a generation of persons. Persons don't know what we mean by Pan-Africanism, what we're talking about when we speak about reparations. How does that relate to our reality today? There's a lot of work. There's a big gap. And I think that gap has to be filled in the educational system. What we're teaching and how we're teaching, and it has a lot to do with the curriculum. I don't know how it is in Trinidad, but I can say for sure that history is one of the certainly at the University of the Bahamas, and even when I was at the University of the West Indies, history is one of has a small number of persons there, first of all, in the program. So we are not studying our history. We are not writing as much as we should be or could be writing about our history, and we're not teaching our children adequately, in my opinion, about the transatlantic slave trade, with Pan-Africanism, as I mentioned already, about what we're doing now, what we're talking about. Why do we need a second decade? This second decade has to be concretely about what are the concerns of people of African descent and how they differ in the Caribbean from North America, from Latin America, and others in the diaspora, and understanding how these issues are addressed in the classroom and how we're learning about each other. So yes, the curriculum and educational system is really crucial, and we cannot afford to get it to not get it right. I'll put it like that.
Mm-hmm. Let me bring Dr. Salandy back in here to because I feel Gaynel, when we have you in our auditorium, we're reporting to you. We're not just
we're having a conversation.
We gotta give you something to go back to the forum with.
Please,
let me just say what we have here in Trinidad, and I'll let Dr. Salandy give you the details. One of the issues that has come up is the concordat in our city. When we talk about systemic racism in our education system, we have something called the concordat. And the research shows that this has acts almost like reverse or a sort of affirmative action for that class that are the inheritors of the wealth of owning our ancestors. That class are the overwhelming beneficiaries of the concordat historically. And Dr. Salandy, perhaps you could speak more to that issue tonight. And if there's anything else in the curricula here that you want to report. Now we're reporting to Dr. Curry.
Yes, certainly. So I would say that the issues in the education system go even past the concordat and even go past the curriculum. But the very makeup of the education system, for example, across the English-speaking Caribbean, I know that many countries would have the 11+ exam. And this exam came forward from a British psychologist called Sir Cyril Burt, who had the idea that people get intelligence from genes. And he did some famous studies using twins to support his thesis. However, it has been found that he falsified his research to make it seem as if genes had more of an impact on intelligence than it really did. And secondly, Sir Cyril Burt was a member of the British Eugenics Association, meaning that he was a believer in white supremacy. So his ideas were so influential that Britain implemented their 11+ exams, and we here in the Caribbean set up our own 11+ exams based upon the idea that at age 11, you could have a test to decide if a child was smart or not, based mainly on their genes, and then put them on a pathway, either towards a pathway of being leaders and change makers, or alternatively, if they were perceived as not being bright, then they would be placed on a track to some sort of vocation. So these central ideas about that we could just at age 11 make a a decisive assessment of a child, all of these things has become embedded in our education system and provides the foundation for very elitist forms of education that do a really poor job of providing holistic context for children's development. And so alongside all of these structural issues of race and class and color and gender, we have some of the foundational aspects of the education system that have not been set up for the best interests of our children.
Indeed, indeed. So we do have a lot to report from the Caribbean, not just Trinidad and Tobago, but right across the Caribbean, in terms of structures that were set up, that we inherited from the colonial period, that do not serve our interests. And of course, we can speak a lot more about that structure of the 11 plus in terms of, and deconstruct exactly how it harms our people. But let's go past the education system now to the second area. The question of let's cross from systemic racism to reparatory justice. And of course, Dr. Curry has already spoken about the importance of having reparatory justice in the curriculum. But let's unpack that a little bit more for our audience.
Yes, I just to tag a little bit of what Ty said a few minutes ago, Salandy said a few minutes ago. This is something that we in the Bahamas are looking at right now. I know the minister was on just yesterday talking about the need to decolonize the educational system, and the fact that we in the Bahamas are struggling with a D average, and that D average is not a reality of as you say, the intelligence of the children in this country. It's how we examining them, what type of systems are we using, what are we teaching them. So there's a need to rethink all of this and re-examine how colonialism still influences the way we're educating our children, and what we're hoping to get out of them in terms of leadership, in terms of the future leaders and forerunners in terms of developing these countries in the Caribbean. So there's a lot of work to be done there. I just wanted to add that.
Dr. Curry, I just want to make one point. And I think that I'm going to say this tonight from the point of view of the ESC. As long as we continue to start teaching history with discovery, we have not advanced one step from the colonial period.
Exactly.
We're still teaching discovery to our children.
Definitely.
And as long as that continues, the Catholic Church last year in May disavowed the doctrine of discovery.
Yeah.
They came out and they acknowledged the role they played in creating a doctrine of discovery, and the role that papal bulls played in the genocide in the Caribbean. And but we continue to teach our children to look at the world through the lens of discovery, which of course teaches them which voices to listen to, which to ignore, who is important, who is not. It's a primer for colonialism. It's a way to explain away what white settler colonialism as something just and appropriate and okay. Powerful nations have the right to dominate weaker nations. All that is inscribed in that very first lesson that we start teaching our kids at 7 years old across the Caribbean. Until we stop teaching discovery as the first history lesson, we have not moved a step further.
And that precisely is what will challenge us in terms of how we address the issue of reparations in the educational system, and how because what my challenge has been, for an example, at the University of the Bahamas, when we talk about reparations, is exactly what you said a few minutes ago. They don't believe that we will ever get it. They don't see why we need to be looking at it. What is this old stuff? Why are we still talking about it? And there's a lot of work to be done. We have a reparations committee here where they're doing work on this issue, but I can tell you that the foundational understanding of our history is where there is a disconnect. And until we can get that right, it's going to be very challenging for us to take the next step, even in believing that we deserve reparations. Many of the younger persons in my class would say to me, oh, what is this reparations, and why we're never going to get it? Why do we need it? Why are we still talking about this? We have to get past that. And that's not these are very bright kids. The challenge is they have not been told. They do not know their own history. They do not know history.
I'm going to ask you an interesting question about the Bahamas. 2 years ago, a man, I don't know if he was sane or not, but he took a sledgehammer to the monument for Columbus. The question is this is the big question. The audience all over the world is listening. Did you guys repair that monument and put it back up? Or have you all put that man in jail? Or have you all freed him? These are the two questions.
Those are very good questions. The first one is Columbus did lose his leg. He chopped it off, and he was not replaced. He's not been reestablished in that post anymore.
Well,
they've moved him somewhere, and he's in waiting to determine what next is to happen. But I understand that he's no longer going to be there at Government House, which is where he was prominent. And people, it was so, yeah. But anyway, I recall that as a little girl driving by that huge statue and thinking, wow, but it was interesting that at this time he did that. It was suggested that this person was mad. I'm questioning that. I'm suggesting that he was not mad, and he knew deliberately he was exactly what he was doing, and he was very on target. It's time to get rid of this colonial stuff that still plagues us as we drive down the street. We see a huge statue of Columbus that adorns our Government House, which should be our house at this stage, right? We've been independent for 50 years. I do not think that this person is in jail. I cannot say for sure where he is right now. It was said that he was insane. I had my own concerns about that. We never heard his voice. The media and everybody else was speaking for him, but we never heard his voice. I would have loved to hear him say what his reasonings were. So it's unfortunate, but it's something that's really very, very real and needs to be. We need to reassess so many. We still have many more around the islands of the Bahamas.
Of course, and Dr. Curry, for your information, or for those listening from the Bahamas, that gentleman, whomsoever he is, and we would love to meet him and greet him and thank him for his good work for beautifying the Bahamas. But I'll say that he falls within a radical tradition going back to Rory Westmus and Martin Carter, who in 1954 bombed the statue of Queen Victoria in Guyana. And so that's where that tradition goes all the way back, destroying these monuments, these white supremacist monuments, these forms of public epistemic violence goes all the way back to 1954, Rory Westmus and Martin Carter, the first two legends, the famous poet, national poet of Guyana, Martin Carter, and his friend Rory Westmus. They were the first two to take that kind of militant action. And so he has, it comes from a great tradition.
Yes. And I'm thank you for reminding me to follow up on that, to see what happened in his particular case. But I know for sure, because I asked recently if there was an intention to return the statue, and I was told unequivocally by someone in the current administration, that they did not intend to return him there. They're still thinking about where to put him.
I know that Reverend Kamau has a significant stash of cash just waiting to do that kind of work.
Let me chime in here once since my name was mentioned, and I categorically deny that stash of cash that he's talking about. Just for record. But for all intents and purposes, we had a decade that was declared. Clearly, there is, and I'm speaking on behalf of the grassroots here. This is the voice of the people speaking now, not the voice of the ESC, but perhaps they would overlap in this case. I'm sure they do. The grassroots sentiment is that the United Nations, and by extension multilateral organizations and associations, including that of CARICOM, are very big on symbolism and very quick to sign treaties and or create organs, but there is very little or no follow through and follow up when it comes to pragmatism and action items. They fall flat. And so we are coming to the end of the decade, and there are many a person out there who does not yet know that between, as it were, 2015 and 2024, that there was an international decade that was declared for people of African descent, let alone to contextualize it in terms of what does the theme of that mean in terms of recognition, justice, and development. They saw no signs, and beyond signs, substance in terms of deliverables where those were concerned throughout the islands. And these islands, for the most part, are led by African governments and African political parties, for the most part. What were plural the impediments to delivery at the level of the UN, and certainly at the level of CARICOM, but thirdly at the level of the nation states? Because here you are showing up in most instances as the majority population in the CARICOM region. You have an international decade declared. You make a big fanfare about it, but there was little to no delivery. Help the average person, the layman, the grassroots man, understand that, understand that phenomenon.
Great
Because,
question, Kwame. Let's hear Dr. Curry. That's a good question.
Yes, I mean, I think you're spot on, and the UN has been struggling with the issue of racism, people of African descent, for a very long time. And I am not entirely convinced that they themselves have taken on board, if you will, in any real way, committed to the decade. And I say that because even within the UN, there was very little action. I just did we're in the process of doing a research now, because one of the things I'm saying is that we're asking for a second decade and we've done no real work ourselves in assessing what happened in the first decade. Okay, people talk about COVID and all these other things. You could talk about the hurricane and 1,000 other things that happened, but really, was there political will and was there financial commitment? And I contend no. The UN has I worked in the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights for quite some time. And I will say that the anti-racism agenda has not always been the most well-funded. I'm being very diplomatic. So the challenge is, if you look at the Permanent Forum, for an example, we're one of the more recent, we are the most recently set up UN body to speak to the issues of people of African descent, to look at, and one of our mandates is to look at how do we facilitate the implementation of the decade and perhaps consider a second decade. We have no funding. We have one staff. We meet once a year for 4 days a year. If you are serious about changing something, if something is really important to you, you fund it, right? It's like saying, I'm concerned about my child's education, but I'm putting no time and money in it, right? If you are concerned about it, you will make it your priority. You will ensure that it has adequate staff. You will ensure that it has the research assistant it needs. You will ensure that the experts that you have are fully supported and funded and can carry out the work effectively, that we can bring in the significant number of grassroots NGOs working on these issues that we would wish to bring to Geneva, New York, and that the Permanent Forum can travel to communities, because the UN walls are high and not everyone can enter. If you know what I mean, it's a long process. First, you got to get a visa, and there's a whole lot of barriers as to why grassroots persons can't get there. So we know that as a forum, we have to get to the grassroots, and to do that, we need funding, which we do not have. So my issue is there really support for it? Have they really committed to it? They haven't, because they haven't funded it. I've seen projects and programs that they're interested in, and they fund it, and it happened. And I've been a part of some of those projects. I'm doing a study now with Dayton University out of Ohio, and I have some students researching this. Quickly for you, I'll mention this. We're looking at the treaty bodies, the human rights bodies, to see the extent to which they, in the last 10 years, first of all, even mentioned the decade in their discussions with states parties. Secondly, my focus is on women of African descent, whether they've ever mentioned anything about women of African descent or what kind of recommendations they've actually given. I will say generally, we did CEDAW so far. We're looking at 4 others, right, including migrant populations and so forth. I will say that very little mention has come out of CEDAW in the last 10 years. Even a reference to the decade has been very slim. So we know what happens to these recommendations. These recommendations are intended to guide states, as well as NGOs, as well as UN entities working on the ground, to help them guide their programming to improve the human rights, lives, and livelihoods of people of African descent. If you are not mentioning the decade, if your recommendations are general and broad and just giving help people of African descent as well as migrants and indigenous and everybody under the sun, your recommendations are so vague they can bring about no real change, right? And so you leave the UN entities saying, when I say, can you support women of African descent? Oh, we don't really know what you need, because we don't have those kind of concrete recommendations coming from the treaty bodies, for an example, coming from the Universal Periodic Review, for example, right? Even if we say we're not ratifying, we're not reporting, and many Caribbean countries don't, but those that do report do not mention people of African descent often in their reports. They speak of us as one homogeneous group of people. So it's difficult oftentimes. So if you don't really pull out the specific concerns and make specific recommendations, then those who are tasked to carry those out, you're not helping very much. So that's what I'm saying. I think the UN has a lot of work to do to make sure that what they're doing.
Just quickly, I have a follow-up question, if I may.
Wait,
I know you're still in train. She's in train, but I want to ask this follow-up question, if I may, please. And it has to do with the fact that, again, bringing it more locally, CARICOM and nationally. Is there a fear? I'm going there. Is there a fear? I'm asking that question. I'm brave enough to ask that question live on Indaba tonight. Is there a fear of the label of reverse racism among the politicians of the Caribbean if they were to target issues affecting people of African descent in their population? You talk about this homogenized approach about dealing with things in general, but not really getting down to the kind of nitty-gritty details and specifying and targeting people of African descent. To what extent do you believe, because it will have to be your opinion here, but we welcome it, is this label of the fear of the label of reverse racism, which could probably spell disaster for the political parties and their funding? To what extent is that fear impacting upon the politics on the ground?
I suspect that could be a part of it, right? I suspect that could be a part of it, because governments, Caribbean government, I mean, I shouldn't speak about Caribbean governments. I have no authority to do that. But just to say that I suspect that could be a part of it. There are many reasons, I don't know all of them, but I suspect that there may be some concerns about alienating certain groups within society, groups within society that may play an important role in terms of the economic development of our countries, certain groups within society that may, put a lot of funding and work and effort into our development initiatives. So maybe there is that hesitation. But, it seems a bit of it doesn't really entirely make sense to me, because CARICOM has led on this whole discussion around reparations. We have done the most work, I think, in this region in terms of what reparations means, what we should be doing. The 10-point plan was out there, upfront. People, we were talking about this and I know that some regions are still trying to grapple with this and to understand what it means and to listen to what CARICOM is saying. So on the one hand, we're leading the charge on these issues, right? And we have done a lot of work on these issues, but that doesn't always come through in our day-to-day engagement on these issues, and particularly at the grassroots level. And it doesn't always come through in how we engage at the international level with treaty bodies and UN mechanisms like the Universal Periodic Review. It doesn't always come through as the most important issue for us, or even an issue that's high up on our level on our list of important issues.
One of the contradictions of the reparations movement is that at the same time that CARICOM has been developing this fantastic reparations focus, Caribbean governments have a history and a present of perpetuating a whole range of injustices against the African populations. So while at the surface level there is lip service towards reparations, in terms of the nuts and bolts policies that have been implemented post-independence, Caribbean leaders have not done a good job of overturning all the colonial aspects that continue to play a central role in determining many aspects of our lives. So I haven't really seen the will to move from lip service that supports reparations to implementing a range of policies in education, healthcare, justice, that seeks to overturn all of these fundamental social inequalities. And until we do that, I think that the experience of reparations will be limited, it will be top-down, and I have no hope for most Caribbean governments to really be moved by reason to move towards some of the urgent policy choices that we need to take. History has shown us that the deep fundamental changes that have happened have not come from the leaders. It have come from the people. So how do we empower and support people-based organizations and cooperatives and groups who are doing good work to be equipped and armed with the knowledge and tools to support an agenda that is aligned with overcoming a lot of our fundamental traumas and issues?
Yeah, and I would just want
Very well
to add
said.
something concrete, in the sense that about 2 years ago, our Prime Minister came forward and announced his support for reparations in a public way. And we in the Caribbean Freedom Project had to write a letter to the press explaining that there was a huge contradiction between promoting and supporting reparations and continuing to maintain public monuments to the very people who committed the atrocities for which you want reparations. And that becomes even more absurd and perverse when it's someone like Governor Picton, who was a massive slave owner and slave trader, who is being removed from places of public veneration in his own country for the crimes he committed in Trinidad, and we can't have him removed from places of public veneration here. We the descendants of the victims of his atrocities can't have the public monuments to him removed here in Trinidad and Tobago. So I want to say that, and the worst case scenario is in Puerto Rico, where one of the largest monuments to Christopher Columbus in the entire world has just recently been put up, and of course in that country. We know from the civil society there that country could not afford to put up that monument that they did a few years ago. So the Caribbean is actually, in some senses, heading in the opposite direction. We're speaking out one side of our mouths, but we're doing things quite to the contrary on the other side. And I think until symbolically we at least have the symbolism clear, you can't ask for reparations and at the same time publicly celebrate the person who committed the atrocity that you're asking for reparations for.
I wanna just ask you to stick a pin there as we say goodbye to our 91.1 FM listening audience. We still continue by way of Facebook and YouTube, and I see your questions, I see your comments. We are going to capture them before we close out on tonight, to be sure. But to Ruskin and to our 91.1 FM Talk City audience, thank you for joining us on Indaba tonight, and see you next week, same place, same time, same channel. Please continue, Shabaka.
Yeah, well, I just want to add one last thing, and that's just that for me, I see the Caribbean as really a discourse between a kind of militant radical tradition and a very limited, narrow, conservative, anti-colonial tradition. They both of them are anti-colonial, but one is very narrow. One was always very narrow. You have people like Alexander Bustamante talking about, I want to be the ruler of my own colony, which is sort of a metaphor for how how one side of that conservative side of the trajectory always saw, from back in the early 20th century, their role as taking over the governance of the colony within the British realm. And then you have that radical tradition represented by Westmus and Carter and Henry Sylvester Williams and Marcus Garvey, CLR James, coming through to the Black Power Revolution. And there's always been that discourse between the two. And when the Caribbean is moving forward, there is a strong current coming from the progressive element, and the discourse is healthy. When that discourse becomes unhealthy, in that one side of that discourse falls down, and in this case, since the 1980s, the radical tradition has almost become non-existent, or it has lost its ability to influence the dialogue. The Caribbean region stagnates. It stops moving forward. And so the goal of that we have to have right now, brothers and sisters, is to reignite and re-energize that progressive movement, that radical tradition in the Caribbean. If that radical tradition does not exist, we stagnate, because the other tradition does not have a sense of the importance of retracing the lines of colonial violence to find the freedom actions we must take to move us forward into true independence.
Just to add a quick point there, I agree with your points, and I think that one of the consequences of a certain type of leadership in the Caribbean post-independence, that it is my view that there are Caribbean governments that owe their own internal population reparations.
Of course.
And that could be seen in Coral Gardens, in Dominica with the Dread Act, and so many cases in which Caribbean governments have reproduced colonial violence and have actually worked hard to erase and exclude those who were pushing for more fundamental social change.
Correct.
And we have not really moved past that in a certain type of Caribbean leadership. I mean, there were some persons who tried, but there was so much conflict between those two types of leadership that you have talked about, that the first type of leadership, to me, is the one that have been predominant, and that has really held back a lot of important change that could have been possible.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Dr. Curry, I'm sure you're familiar with Frantz Fanon's Wretched of the Earth. In that book, and Salandy and Brother Kamau, in that book, actually in 1954, he talks about the kind of reactionary leadership that we're going to get at independence. And he says you can actually identify them by how they dress. And it's very interesting because right here in Trinidad and Tobago, we have had debates in Parliament where large sections of the Parliament have tried to censor certain individuals who have tried to come into Parliament without the European suit. So individuals in our Parliament have come to Parliament and said, I don't want to have to wear this absurd costume that is meant for another climate, with the tie, the waistcoat, the thing, the what is it called, that long trench coat. I don't want to have to wear the hat and carry the walking stick. And the rest of the Parliament has argued, some people have argued that you can't come in here, you're desecrating these sacred halls by not wearing a tie, by not wearing some other form of European garment, which has nothing to do with the Caribbean. And if you go back, Dr. Salandy, I'm sure you recall people like Ivan Lockton and others back in the 60s had decided that the Caribbean dress uniform was the shirt jack. And they proudly wore those things anywhere they went. And of course, as I said, once that radical tradition is no longer influencing the discourse, it just goes, we stagnate and we start going backwards.
I want to bring Dr. Curry back in, but before I do, let me just highlight a few questions, comments, and perhaps you may want to respond to a few of them in the time that we have left. Bamwiana, an attorney at law who was actually very responsible for the decriminalization of cannabis in Trinidad and Tobago. So shout out to you, Bamwiana, with regards to that work that you put in on behalf of the All Mansions of Rastafari. He's making the point the reality is a UN decade for African people really was without substance. Hence the reason little or no funding was forthcoming. The truth is they fear true African unity. That's more a comment than a question, isn't it? By way, of course, of Aquarius Crossing, our Caribbean leaders are followers. They are following the agenda. So they can't be true leaders. Again, if we don't deal with the issue of the economic question, if you are still beholden to foreign direct investment, per the same literature that activist extraordinaire Shabaka Kambon is talking about, you can't be too radical if you are beholden to the pocketbook of someone else. Now, can you? Clifford Hines is, of course, giving you salute, Shabaka, on your words well said. Judah Forever out of St. Lucia is locked on and listening with regards to our agenda on tonight. Is a very potent statement from Bongo Wisely, who is the, as it were, Caribbean Rastafari Organization chair. And he is, of course, bringing greetings, but he's also saying out of St. Lucia, by the way, the support will come from civil society groups, but not from the political directorates. Aquarius Crossing is also making the point that the UN had a resolution in 2023 to end racism and discrimination. Out of 193 persons, 100, well, countries, nations, 106 voted for, and the rest, as it were, against, including the US, EU, AU, Israel, Netherlands, in allies. The UN and its controllers are racist with regards to his statement. Of course, we just want to recognize Fremont Lawrence out of St. Lucia, Deborah E. Walters out of New York as well, and of course, right there in your hometown in Bahamas, Prophet Jamiki bringing greetings. So there isn't much confidence among the people in the political directory. The jury is out. They talk big, but they deliver little, if anything at all. And the reparations movement in their mind, it's not said here explicitly, it's more implicit, is more of an external focus to have access to finance that they would use more in general development aid for the countries of which they are a part, where it gets lost in some soup of development aid, and it's not going to go directly to the true beneficiaries, the descendants of those who were enslaved. Speak to these varied themes and issues. There's a disquiet, there's a dissatisfaction. The people are not at all encouraged by what is being done, notwithstanding what is being said. And when you're through with that, perhaps you may want to give your closing comments. As a matter of fact, you'll answer that. I'll take closing comments from Dr. Salandy, and then I guess we can return to you for your closing comments. But certainly respond to the grassroots people, and their vibration and their energy is pretty strong on tonight. They are not convinced, Dr. Curry.
Yes, and rightly so. I mean, should we be speaking about the decolonization of the UN? The UN in and of itself is it the right space for this conversation to be happening? Who are we asking to develop these policies, programs, and processes? In an organization, I arrived in 90, I think it was 98, and I had I was one of 70 lawyers in my team, trying to push them to focus. One only Black lawyer of 70 in my team, and I was the one pushing on these issues and getting very little traction. In fact, getting sidelined a lot. And so when you're in this kind of environment and you're trying to push these kinds of issues, and the organization in and of itself doesn't see this as a priority, you have to rethink, is this the right space? One of the things that the Permanent Forum is looking at right now is precisely what was just said by one of the persons calling in. The focus has to be on civil society. When civil society rises up, when the voices come from the community, when they push, I always say that it wasn't until George Floyd was murdered and the international community, and people went onto the streets, that the UN was forced to say, okay, we need to set up this permanent forum now. Because it was something that was on the table for quite some time and not happening, right? So the push has to come from the people. You're right, because it's not going to come from the political leaders in the UN. It is not. I will say that there has been some more discussion around these issues in the UN. I've never heard the word reparations and so forth back in the day. That would have been a taboo word. Now more and more people are actually speaking about it, and they have. They keep having a sort of a proliferation of mandates on this issue. Very little traction. The change will come when you give the power to civil society organizations and grassroots organizations. When we met in Geneva recently, we had over 1,000 persons in the room. Very powerful, very, very powerful. For I think we have another shot at doing something where we might be able to change a little bit the sort of declaration on for people of African descent. If we can influence that and have civil society influence that, it should be for us, by us, about us. It cannot be something coming from the UN and the Western group that tells us what we ought to do with these particular issues. So I agree wholeheartedly. Civil society is the space, is the group, grassroots communities and the groups. We have to find a way. Permanent form has to come to the people. We have to come out of those. I need to find a way to have input from more strategic input from civil society. So when we come there, we don't want to be when you come to Geneva or New York, we don't want to be seen as a talk shop. We want you to come with your recommendation, hard, concrete recommendations, solutions for your community. That is what's going to make a difference, because we are committed to working with civil society and for civil society to push where we can with governments and others to make some things happen. But really, this work is going to primarily come from civil society organizations, grassroots communities, and we must speak for ourselves. We must write for ourselves. We know our stories better than anyone else. We cannot let others speak and write and continue to tell our stories. And that's why I think it's so important for the forum to have the forum, because it provides that space. And none of the other mechanisms that the UN have put forward actually provides that space. The Committee on Elimination of Racial Discrimination does not. You have to be a member. You have to ratify. You have to report, and it's a very sort of a strict process. The working group as well, they have they are a little bit more flexible, but very specific mandate. The special rapporteur, one person can go to one community at a time. You have the permanent forum that is open for all people of African descent, that provides a forum, and we can take the forum members out.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Tai. Closing remarks.
One of the shifts I think that has to happen in terms of the reparations dialogue is that we have to move beyond seeing reparations as being something that has to come from things that have happened a long time ago, to seeing that reparations is also due for a lot of things that are present and ongoing. And part of that has to be in terms of how the Caribbean is subserviently embedded in a lot of these economic structures and a whole set of agreements that we have little say in. And there's a whole lot of negative impacts on the ground from all of these agreements and Western institutions that were not democratically elected and constituted. So most of these so-called global international institutions do not serve the interests of global South people, yet they have an aura of representing us all. And one of the implications of that unaddressed international landscape is that presently we have a whole range of interlocking and interconnected traumas and hierarchies that continue to define the types of standards of living that many of our people have to experience. So I'm talking about deep and interconnected ways in which people are disconnected from their self, from their history, and from their traditions, from nature. And so there is that degree of violence that continues to define reality for many people and even children in the Caribbean. And I just want to point out something that I consider a missing part of our dialogue in terms of understanding the experience of our people. So there's something called adverse childhood experiences. And the research has shown that when you have children who are experiencing these, often seen in terms of abuse, neglect, and violence, they are often 5 times more likely to display behavioral problems, many times more likely to experience mental health issues, including depression, many times more likely to exhibit violence, and even issues with their health. So we are talking about how a whole range of unaddressed contexts now manifests itself in a whole set of toxic arrangements that come across as adverse childhood experiences that affect quality of life. So healing from the past and present traumas of colonialism and neoliberalism and capitalism is not just about locating harm and damage, a few hundred years ago, but understanding how a whole set of these present arrangements really affects us at the most fundamental level. So how do we generate new ways of understanding reality and new ways of equipping people with the tools to navigate and heal? And I don't think that we focus enough on the tools and knowledge that we need to heal, not just from things of the past, but also things that are very much ongoing and present. So that is one of my main focus areas, and I think addressing that would involve building more institutions and more cross-collaboration between different institutions that are doing different aspects of the work.
Yeah. Dr. Salandy, I don't think that enough Caribbean leadership has demonstrated, and now from independence to the present, the capacity to understand the past, the courage to confront it, or the will and moral character to choose a better future. And that's where we are. But I want to share this document here. Dr. Curry, this is for you. The last time I saw you in person in Geneva, I told you that as soon as this document was complete, that we would officially present it to the United Nations Permanent Forum. We are about to, we have already presented a draft to the National Committee on Monuments here in Trinidad and Tobago. It's called the Civil Society Report on National Monuments that Glorify Racism and White Supremacy. It's from the Emancipation Support Committee and the Caribbean Freedom Project. We are in the final stages of editing this document. As soon as that is done, we are going to call on you to officially accept this on behalf of the Permanent Forum. And hopefully this will become part of the deliberations going forward, and that there could be something coming from the forum to encourage our government here in Trinidad and Tobago to act appropriately to end the open glorification of individuals and values that run contrary to those which we proclaim.
No, thank you very much for that. I look forward to receiving it. And I do remember our conversation.
Final draft is almost ready to come.
Looking forward to it. Thank you.
Many sleepless nights on the part of this brother. As a matter of fact, he had to skip a few of our Indaba programs to get that done. But we are proud of him and the great work that he has put into that, together with the panel, the team that certainly contributed to its amazing content. I too do look forward to a copy myself, a final draft. A hard copy autograph would be fine. 50 years from now, I'll have bragging rights. I'll put it in a glass case, somewhere. But for all intents and purposes, we are closing. We are closing by way of our curtains down on tonight. I want to say a special thank you to 91.1 FM Talk City for carrying us live between 8 p.m. and 9 p.m. I certainly want to thank our special guest on tonight, Dr. Gaynel Corey, of course, of the University of Bahamas, also one of the members of the Permanent Forum of for People of African Descent, on people of African descent, at, of course, the United Nations, and certainly an activist extraordinaire, a revolutionary scholar. So many accolades. We can go on all night. You were brave. You were courageous. We dealt you some difficult questions from time to time, but you handled everything in stride, and we are so happy to have had you with us. I'm sure the Indaba audience shares the same sentiment. Dr. Tyehimba Salandy, also no stranger to us. Again, another academic activist, another thought leader within our movement right here in Trinidad and Tobago, doing justice to reparatory justice in the sense of bringing it home, making it more accessible, making it more real, making it more relatable. Again, coming out of ICA Institute and that of University of the West Indies, also played a significant role by way of teaching and training anyway, by way formally, I think, of Cipriani Labor College. But again, a brother extraordinaire, and we always love having you, on Indaba. In a way, you are our unofficial fourth co-host. Know that you have that bragging title. And we always look forward to having you as oft as we can. Facebook audience, thank you so much for tuning in. Please smash love on that button. Leave a comment. Let us know how this kind of rapport was received by you. What did you learn? What are some of the next steps for you so that the conversation continues beyond tonight's Rastafari don't say dialogue, they say live-a-log. So beyond tonight's live-a-log, what are the next steps? What are some of the things that we can do? Of course, be sure to share this by way of your friends, your family, other persons that need to access this level of Pan-African content. It's not every day that we get to do this and to ask these kinds of questions, deal with these kinds of issues. And so when we do it once per week, again, Rastafari will say, no, not week strong. And I deal with no weak business. We need to make it count. So share it as far and as wide as you can. For tonight, anyway, we want to thank, of course, our backstage personnel. Before I close out, Rene Francois bringing our ESC corner on tonight, our very effervescent Queen Mother, Zakia Uzuma Wadada. And there's a question I'm asking. We can't conclude. We'll have to conclude when we meet again. And it's the question of what role can NGOs play as extensions of the Permanent Forum on people of African descent through things like Memorandum of Understanding and other things like that, which can allow for these groups to act like proxies on the ground. So yes, money could be invested on the one hand, but you have people on the ground that are doing really great work. And by way of more strategic partnership, there can certainly be, as it were, more done within, hopefully, what would be the next decade, the international decade for people of African descent. Well, we are out of time. We're not out of love. We're not out of faith. We're not out of words. I am His Excellency Ambassador Reverend Kwame Kamau, and I'm joined on tonight by my amazing activist extraordinaire and communication specialist co-host, Shabaka Kambon. We're saying a special good night to Dr. Claudius Fergus. Couldn't be with us on tonight because of work being done. He's traveling abroad, but you are certainly very, very missed. We look forward to your return in about 2 or 3 weeks or so. But until then, again, love and light, and to each and everyone, a very, very pleasant good night.